You know what? I've spent the better part of my life in the shadows of sound stages and the flickering glow of editing bays, and in the movie business, you develop a sixth sense for disaster, a way to smell a failing production before the first frame is ever shot, and I have seen it all, from $80 million sets burning down because of a faulty wire to world-renowned method actors losing their sense of self and spiraling into screaming matches with empty chairs. And I have watched directors, under the crushing weight of a studio's expectations, have complete psychological meltdowns in the middle of a crowded set. But what I witnessed tonight, this so-called national address, was something that no screenwriter would ever dare to pen for if I saw this in a script. I'd reject it for being far too unrealistic and over the top, yet this wasn't a movie. This was reality broadcast in high resolution to every corner of the planet, leaving a pit in my stomach because of the raw instability of the man at the center of it all. People like to use the term train wreck loosely for a bad interview or a botched debate, but what happened tonight was the literal definition of a train wreck happening in slow motion, where you imagine a massive locomotive speeding toward a broken bridge, and instead of hitting the brakes, the conductor is leaning out of the window, screaming at the passengers on the platform, blaming the tracks, the wind, and the passengers themselves for the fact that the bridge is out. And that was exactly the energy of tonight's address. Because you are supposed to give a national address when you have a message bigger than yourself, a moment designed for the dignity of the Oval Office, that hallowed room where Lincoln pondered the Union and FDR spoke of fear itself. And when a president sits behind that resolute desk, they are supposed to be the anchor in the storm, telling the American people that we have a problem, but here is the plan to get through it together. Instead, tonight, the anchor didn't just slip, it shattered. And we saw a man who looked like he had been haunted by ghosts for 72 hours straight, with darting eyes and sallow skin, delivering a frantic, incoherent stream of consciousness that felt less like a speech and more like a desperate plea for a reality that no longer exists. And as a professional, I had to look at the technicality of the failure, where in Hollywood, we have a map called the script, and tonight, that map was set on fire in the first 90 seconds as he ignored the words reflecting in his glasses from the teleprompter, words crafted by professionals to bring unity, and instead chose to dive into the darkest rabbit holes of the internet, rambling about the deep state and invisible enemies in a public nervous breakdown that makes one wonder how a man who cannot navigate a 20-minute speech without losing his grip on his own thoughts is supposed to navigate a global crisis with his finger on the nuclear codes. The Oval Office is a sacred space, but tonight it was used as a personal venting chamber where he started naming specific reporters, local judges, and political rivals, settling petty, personal grievances on the taxpayer's dime, like someone screaming at their middle school bully while receiving an Oscar. And I couldn't help but compare him to the greats like Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Reagan after the Challenger exploded, or even Bush standing on the rubble of the Twin Towers, all of whom understood the gravity of the moment. Whereas tonight we saw the anti-leader, a man jabbing his finger and barking at the audience with a voice rising in pitch, conducting an angry, invisible orchestra that only he could hear. As a producer, I felt the absolute paralyzing panic radiating from the staffers and advisors standing just out of frame, who were likely watching the monitor with their heads in their hands, wishing someone would pull the plug or trigger a technical difficulty before the moment he completely lost it. His face turning a concerning shade of red with veins bulging in his neck as he claimed everything bad in the country was the fault of his predecessors and a global cabal showing not passion but pure, unfiltered, toxic rage. We know politicians lie. It is part of the trade. But there is a terrifying difference between lying to the public and lying to oneself. And tonight it became clear that he genuinely believes his own fabrications, living in a cinematic universe where he is the eternal victim and hero simultaneously, interrupting himself and veering off into tangents about the economy, immigration, and legal troubles all in the same breath. A stream of consciousness rant that would be exhausting in a coffee shop, let alone from the leader of the free world. While we watched from our living rooms, our allies in London and Tokyo and our enemies in Moscow and Beijing were also watching, seeing not strength, but a captain who has lost his compass, signaling that America is in a state of chaotic transition, which puts every single one of us at risk because the footage doesn't lie, and you can't edit out a breakdown that the whole world saw in real time. The second, the camera light went dark, the damage control machine went into overdrive with statements to clarify what he actually meant, blaming the lighting, the teleprompter, and the media. But in the film industry, we know you can't color correct a man's rage. And tonight wasn't just a bad day at the office, it was a warning sign and a preview of what happens when a person fundamentally unfit for a role is forced to perform under pressure, especially when the world is on edge and we are more divided than ever. We need a strategist, not a conspiracy theorist. And tonight proved that we are currently on our own, making it up to the citizens to demand better and refuse to accept this as the new normal, because if we do, we are just as responsible for the crash as the conductor is. And even though the cameras are off, the reality remains that we must demand a leader who respects the office as much as the people they serve. I have watched the most talented actors in the world crumble under far less pressure than this, and usually we just cut the scene and try again tomorrow. But in the real world, there are no retakes for a collapsed presidency. And the tragedy of tonight is that we aren't just watching a character arc fail. We are watching the structural integrity of a nation, as leadership give way under the weight of one man's ego. And as someone who has dedicated their life to the art of storytelling, I can tell you that this story ends in disaster, unless the audience decides to change the ending. Because the look in his eyes wasn't just anger, it was a profound, haunting emptiness. A sign of someone who has stared into the void for too long, and now the void is speaking through him. The historical resonance of the desk he sat behind only made the scene more grotesque, a stark reminder of the giants who once occupied that seat compared to the small, bitter man who sat there tonight. And I can almost hear the ghosts of past presidents whispering in the corners of that room, wondering how it all came to this, how the highest office in the land became a stage for such a low performance. And I keep going back to the way he gestured those short, jerky movements that betrayed his internal chaos. A man at war with his own teleprompter, a man at war with his own staff, a man at war with reality itself. If this were a movie, the critics would call it a masterpiece of psychological horror, a deep dive into the mind of a collapsing tyrant. But for the rest of us, it is just life in the 21st century, a constant barrage of the absurd and the dangerous, and we have become so desensitized to the madness that we almost forget how much it matters, how much is at stake every time he opens his mouth. We have to remember that this is not a game. It is not a reality show. And there are real people with real lives who are affected by every incoherent word he utters, and when he talks about crime or the economy with such total disregard for the truth, he is not just lying to us, he is gaslighting an entire nation, trying to make us doubt our own eyes and ears. I've seen the way a bad lead can ruin a whole cast, how the poison spreads from the top down until everyone on the set is miserable and unproductive, and that is exactly what is happening to this country right now, as the toxicity of the top office seeps into every aspect of our public life, making it impossible to have an honest conversation or a shared sense of purpose. We are being led by a man who views the world as a series of attacks against him, a man who cannot see past his own reflection. And that kind of narcissism is not just a character flaw, it is a national security risk, a vulnerability that our enemies are all too happy to exploit. I think about the children watching that address, the ones who are supposed to look up to the president as a role model, and I wonder what they learned tonight. Did they learn that it's okay to blame others for your failures? Did they learn that rage is a substitute for reason? Did they learn that the truth is whatever you say it is? These are the questions that will haunt us for years to come, long after he is gone from that office, as we try to repair the damage he has done to the fabric of our society and the reputation of our nation around the world. We are at a crossroads, and tonight was a vivid, terrifying map of the wrong direction, a path that leads only to further chaos and division, and it is up to us to find our way back to something resembling sanity, something resembling dignity, something resembling America.